Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. California is experiencing a housing shortage. This is particularly true of low-income households, which make up 40% of all California households. There are a myriad of state programs, however, that are supposed to help increase the stock of affordable housing. Are those state programs working? Are they delivering? The recent report by the California State Auditor answers that question. Our guest is Elaine Howle, California State Auditor, and she's here to explain the report's findings. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So first of all, can you give us a general overview on the shortage of affordable housing in California? How bad is the problem?
Well, we have a serious problem in California. As you mentioned, 40% of households in California are low-income households. And what that means is they make, 80% or less of the median income in their particular region. And we're looking at about 3 million households, according to HUD, that are in that category. And what we say in the audit report is they're burdened. So 30% of their income is going towards either rent, or if they're fortunate enough to own a home, towards their mortgage. So there's a significant number of people in California who, if they have housing, they're struggling to pay for that housing. But we also have a significant number of individuals in California who are homeless. And certainly with the pandemic, that situation is getting worse.
Yeah, so what state agencies exist to increase affordable housing in California?
There are a variety of agencies. Our Housing Community Development Agency is responsible for looking at a state plan, working with local jurisdictions to make sure affordable housing is built. Housing units in general are built, but certainly emphasizing affordable housing. There are a couple of committees at the State Treasurer's Office that allows for developers to access funding through bonding or tax-exempt bonds and other types of financing. So those are key areas. Then there's a California Housing Finance Authority, which again assists developers in obtaining financing with an emphasis on building multifamily housing units that can house numerous families and can really address the affordable housing crisis in our state.
It seems, though, that at the end of the day, you really need local jurisdictions to cooperate. I mean, the state oversees those local efforts, but ultimately it's up to local jurisdictions to really make it happen.
That's true. And that's one of the concerns that the legislature had when they asked us to conduct the audit is, are there barriers at the local level that are precluding developers from building affordable housing because we need more affordable housing for our low income individuals in California. And there are barriers that locals can put up, whether they do it intentionally or not. They really do make it difficult to construct affordable housing in California.
Yeah, but local agencies, local jurisdictions are supposed to come up with this thing called housing plans. They're local housing plans, but they're not done every year. They're not done annually, are they?
No, not necessarily. I think they're done. I don't recall the exact time frame, but
I think I read like 5 to 8 years, something like that. It's a pretty long period of time.
It's a pretty long period of time. And one of the other problems is our state housing community development department should be reviewing those plans. They don't necessarily have the authority to direct the local jurisdiction what to do, but they need to be able to look at that plan and see, is this respective community, local jurisdiction, really addressing the need for affordable housing in California in their particular region, or are they not planning to build enough affordable housing?
Yeah, so it looks like it's a plan, kind of a guideline recommendation, but doesn't seem to be a lot of teeth to it. But the state recently enacted some statutes to better promote the development of affordable housing. What did they do, and did they solve the problem?
Well, it helped with the problem. It didn't solve the problem. I mean, some of the statutory changes were to streamline some of the processes that developers have to go through, or those interested in constructing affordable housing, to try to streamline some of the processes that, again, to try to get those projects approved, streamline the processes for accessing funding from the state, because a developer not only needs, their own personal investment and private investors, but the state of California has programs that can really help with this type of development. So some of the statutory changes were really to try to streamline some of those processes, but we don't think it's gone far enough. Locals are not doing enough to build affordable housing.
I think I read too that they've actually increased the number of housing units developers can request. So that's a good thing, right? They can't put a limit on that, and then you can expand. They are expanded requirements for local jurisdictions to identify in their housing plan, so make their housing plans a little more robust. Sounds like they're doing that as well.
That's correct. That's correct. So when that housing plan is put together, the local jurisdiction has to identify where in our jurisdiction are we intending to build affordable housing. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so up next, we're going to talk about the state auditor's thoughts on the state agency's actions to address affordable housing in California. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with California State Auditor Elaine Howle about a recent report her office issued on state programs that are established to address the affordable housing need in California. Their conclusion, quote, the state lacks an effective approach to building enough affordable homes, unquote. So one of the key shortcomings in your report is, which you cite is, quote, the lack of, quote, an effective plan for using and overseeing the billions of dollars available for affordable housing, unquote. Can you explain?
Sure. There's a few things we found problematic at the state level as far as having a comprehensive plan. The plan lacked specific key attributes. How many units do we need to construct over the course of the next 5-10 years? Where in California do we need to construct those units? But really, an important attribute that we didn't see is a central location where you could identify all of the funding sources that are available. What resources do we have from a financial perspective from HCD, from CalHFA, which is the Housing Finance Agency, from the State Treasurer's Office, making sure that we understand as a state all of the different resources, and we're communicating that to developers so they can access those resources to be able to construct housing. Also looking at where the best impact, how can we have the best impact with the funds we invest? Where do we need to invest those funds? And then measuring outcomes. Are we constructing units in the appropriate places? Are we building enough affordable housing? Are we building enough multifamily housing? Those are the kinds of things we would have expected to see in a state plan.
Yeah, I mean, having a clearinghouse of information obviously makes a lot of sense. Measuring whether you're effectively and efficiently utilizing resources, again, just makes common sense. But one thing you noted in your report, you found the state mismanaged $2.7 billion to address affordable housing. How in the world did that happen?
Right, that's bonds that were available. And this again was the State Treasurer's Office. They had two committees, a debt limit committee, and that committee, basically authorizes bonds and then allocates those bonds to different entities that are interested. And some of those bonds have an expiration date. And so what the debt limit committee did was allocated some of those funds to the pollution control. Because they knew they would be able to use some of the funds, and then that would allow, prevent it from those bonds from expiring. But pollution control was not reporting back. Debt limit committee wasn't monitoring, and unfortunately, pollution control only used about $800 million. So out of over $3 billion in bonds, $2.7 billion expired, and those funds could have been used elsewhere.
But there's a deadline, right? It expires, then you
Right.
no longer available. Your audit revealed that the state's housing plan lacked information about the extent of available housing resources, a strategy for their optimal use, and an assessment of their impact. Those are some pretty big shortcomings. What are the implications?
Right. This is what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, is understanding where the need is within each jurisdiction and how much is being invested in each of those jurisdictions. And are we providing resources, not necessarily equitably, but are we making sure that the resources we're investing are really having an impact in California? So what we found is some counties were getting access to some of this these resources that were available at the state level, and other counties were getting zero resources. And the state HCD and the state treasurer's office was not doing a good job of monitoring the investment of resources in California to build affordable housing.
Yeah, it seems like, I was thinking when I was reading your report, the adage of, measure twice, cut once. It seems like a lot of the problem is due to a lack of relevant data to develop a comprehensive, coordinated state plan. True?
Yes, that's true. When we looked at HCD to determine whether or not they had a database that captured information such as the types of applications they're receiving, what kinds of funding has been awarded, how many units have been built, where have those units been constructed, the types of things that you would expect when you're managing a housing program and trying to invest in affordable housing in California. You would expect the state to have a unified database like that, and we saw that it was lacking.
Yeah, you refer to the 4 housing agencies' program requirements as, quote, misaligned and inconsistent, unquote. That's pretty tough language.
Right. What we meant there is, the different agencies we looked at the requirements. So if I'm a developer or I'm interested in building a project in a community in California, and I need to go to CalHFA with Housing Finance Agency for certain loans, and then I need to go to the state treasurer's office for some bonding, and the program is going to support the same project, but I apply at one place and they have some requirements, and then I apply at the other place and the requirements are slightly different. So what we're suggesting is you need to align those requirements so that a developer can it's basically a one-stop shop. I only have
the developer's going for the same product going to multiple agencies, so it should be coordinated. We only have about 20 seconds left in the segment, but we can't get to all your recommendations. But what's the overarching theme of your recommendations?
Overarching theme is to make it easier to build affordable housing in California. Standardized processes, have these requirements or the types of things that you have to submit to the state consistent, the requirements from what the treasurer expects versus what HCD or CalHFA expects. We need to streamline and make sure that we're doing everything we can to make it easier to build affordable housing in California.
Yeah, while the state government has its shortcomings when dealing with the issue of affordable housing, local governments also play a role. Are local governments doing their job? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with California State Auditor Elaine Howle about a recent report her office issued on affordable housing. You indicate in your report that the state has not ensured that local jurisdictions, in most instances we're talking about cities, has not done a good job ensuring that local jurisdictions have accommodated the need for affordable housing. How so?
Well, the Housing Community Development, which is the state agency that's responsible for working with local jurisdictions, is not making sure that they're reviewing the housing plans that local jurisdictions put together. They need to exercise more oversight to make sure local jurisdictions are really committed to building affordable housing. What we saw is locals can put up barriers. They can require high fees from developers. They can limit the number of units that can be constructed. There are the types of things that local jurisdictions can really put up a barrier, whether it's intentional or not, making it difficult to construct affordable housing in California.
It sounds like the devil's in the details. You can have a local plan, but the devil's in the details. You also indicate that perhaps the state's default standards for what constitutes, quote unquote, allowable density, unquote, may be to blame. And you also made some pretty simple suggestions. What are they?
Right. Density is an issue that we addressed in the report. The standard density default density standard right now for affordable housing in California is 10 to 30 units per acre. But what we saw when we looked at some of the counties that were doing a good job of building affordable housing, building multifamily housing, we saw their density standards were higher than that. So what we're suggesting to the state of California, the legislature, is make the density standards bigger, because a lot of local jurisdictions are saying, well, the default is 10 to 30, so I'll come in around 20 and I'm fine. What we're saying is make that density standard higher to allow local jurisdictions to construct more, but also that indicates an expectation to locals that you need to increase the density standard, because then you can build more affordable housing, particularly multifamily housing.
So those local jurisdictions are doing just enough to meet that standard. It's just raise the standard a little bit because it's shown it can be done in many places.
Mhm.
Also mentioned, we've talked about this earlier, about the need to streamline the local approval process.
Right. The local approval process, can be difficult for developers. Again, some of the jurisdictions make it very difficult. There's a very lengthy process that developers have to go through, and it can be very frustrating and take a long time. And some developers just decide it's just not worth the effort to have to go through to try to construct affordable housing in this particular jurisdiction.
Yeah, and that's it. Just you can't create disincentives. It's hard enough,
Right.
and then you have all these different requirements by different agencies and at different timelines. It get to be just administrative nightmare. So coordination seems to be kind of needed in this area. Now, I want to ask you about. In your report, you say at least 470 or 87% of the state's local jurisdictions, 87%, that's a large number, are not on track to provide the needed affordable homes that Californians need. As a result, it appears the state has not done enough to ensure local jurisdictions follow through on their local plans to accommodate affordable housing. So what are some of your proposed solutions to address that problem?
Right. What we felt that the legislature needs to do is give our state housing community development agency department more authority to oversee local jurisdictions and really be able to have expectations that they can enforce, requiring local jurisdictions to streamline their processes. Housing community development needs to look at, not just look at the housing plan, but then really look at what are the jurisdictions doing? What kind of process do they have? If I'm a developer, what process do I have to go through to even get approval to construct units? Looking at the density standards. So the state of California needs to have more of a role and through our HCD, Housing Community Development Agency, to enforce some of these requirements.
One of the things I also wanted to point out in your report, highlight, is that you talked about an appeals process.
Right.
That was pretty interesting.
Right, and we actually saw that other states have that process where if a developer continues to run up against barriers at the local level, but has submitted everything, there would be an appeal process where that developer could go to the state of California and say, I want to build affordable housing in this jurisdiction, and I have done everything the local jurisdiction has asked of me, but I'm running up against these roadblocks, and there could be an appeal process. If the local jurisdiction denies the permit or denies the ability, then they could appeal to the state, and the state could say, no, we're going to give this developer approval. We saw that in other states, and it worked quite well.
Yep, it seems like it's only fair. Well, I want to thank the State Auditor, Elaine Howle, for joining us. Up next, what is the governor and legislature doing to address the issue of affordable housing? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Prior to the pandemic, addressing the issue of affordable housing in California was considered among Gavin Newsom's top priorities. He even spoke about doing something along the lines of a Marshall Plan, the historic redevelopment plan that revived countries of Western Europe after World War II to address the issue. So what has actually been done to address California's housing crisis? We'll ask LA Times Sacramento Bureau Chief John Myers and CalMatters columnist Dan Walters. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So, John, let me ask you, how would you assess the state's progress when it comes to housing?
Not great. I mean, I think, the short answer here, Mark, is that this is a complicated topic. It doesn't seem complicated at one point, and certainly understandably that we just simply need more housing in this state for people, especially housing that they can afford, to be clear. But the issues are complicated. We didn't get to this point easily in terms of the difficulties, the challenges, the sense of local priorities versus statewide goals. I think we're still stuck in a lot of those issues about density, about what it means to have California neighborhoods, what they looked like decades ago and what they're going to look like in a state with 40 million people. So the pandemic has slowed a lot of this down. And I think a lot of this still is to be determined in how it'll play out in Sacramento.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty daunting. I mean, they're talking about at one point we needed 200,000 units being produced every year. We're at half of that. When it gets to affordable housing, they're talking about they needed 70,000 units. But now they're saying we've fallen so far behind that, we need 125,000 a year to deal with the affordable housing issue. So, Dan, how would you assess how housing has been dealt with these last few years?
Well, I think the proof may be in the numbers. Housing construction going down, not up in California. In fact, it's not just necessarily pandemic related. It was going down even before the pandemic hit. It was going down even when the economy of California was growing strong. We've been trending downward in housing starts in California down to maybe 100,000 in a good year, but net, after you take all the houses that are destroyed, razed, obsolete, burned by fire, the net is down around 75 to 80,000 a year. And that's way, way, way short of what California needs. Even though our population growth has slowed to a crawl, we have this enormous backlog of housing need, and particularly affordable housing. The second issue is going the wrong way, but also the cost. It's about $500,000 to build a unit of affordable housing in California on average. And in some communities, in expensive communities, $750,000 or even $1 million a unit. And that is probably the greatest impediment to doing what's necessary to be done.
So this is a problem that's not going away, Dan. What's the state's most likely steps going forward? Are we going to deal with the great white whale of CEQA reform?
Well, that's the CEQA reform. California Environmental Quality Act is one. The misuse of that act is one of the impediments to housing in California. But the biggest impediment is simply opposition in local communities to having more housing that people say brings more traffic, more crime, more hassle. Why should we take this? We don't need this. And that's particularly true of high density, lower income housing. And so really, in the end, what it's going to take is the state confronting government directly on these issues, because local governments, heeding their constituents, are very, very reluctant to approve the kind of housing that California needs the most.
I'm sorry, John, we got about 10 seconds left. So are we going to solve this problem?
I think it's going to take years. It took us a long time to get into it. I think Governor Newsom has set it to priority, but once we get through the pandemic, he's got to push. There's got to be some impetus to get through this.
Well, hopefully that will happen. I want to thank our guests, California State Auditor Elaine Howle, Dan Walters from CalMatters, and John Myers from the LA Times. And thank you for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org. If you want to stay up to date on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.